What First of all, thank you guys for having me on. It's always an honor to sit down with folks that want to make change, positive change, and have been doing it for so long. It's just like it seems like we've been at this journey for a long, long time. And believe it or not, although we think we haven't moved the paradigm, I think we have to some degree. And I could tell by talking to other people and stuff that we're on the right side of a lot of this stuff. So that's a positive thing. Sometimes we don't hear that. All we hear is the negative, but we're on the right side of a whole lot of this stuff. And our legacy will be that we were on the right side of a lot of this stuff. Um, I don't know where to start. I don't know specifically. Where to start. I think that, like, for me, and not to go through the whole story in the book and everything, but just to tell you that primarily I was a guy in the projects in Jersey City, housing development. I lived in the area where there were three housing developments. And I lived in the high rise housing development, which we felt that, like, oh, we're in the high rise, that we were a little bit better than those in the low rise. But
Yeah.
the bottom line is we're all on the bottom floor. There was no high rise in our lives. And I didn't really get involved. I knew the war was happening. I heard the news a little bit. I wasn't paying that much attention. I didn't read that much about it in the paper. You know, one of the things about the anti-war movement that I've always, talked about was that they never brought it to the black community. That all the a lot of the stuff that happened on college campuses or in white neighborhoods, they knew that there was conscientious objection. I didn't know anything about conscientious objection. There were different things that were happening around us, but we just didn't know that we had no alternative. Being faced with either go in the army or go to jail, that was a no-brainer for me. And I had most of my uncles and stuff had served in the military, so it wasn't as though that I was unfamiliar with what military life was like for them. The difference was is that some of my uncles served in peacetime, and I think I had one or two uncles that one might have served in the around the Korean time, and one might have served around the World War II time, but they never spoke about them experiences. So I had no idea what to expect when I went in the military. When I first got drafted and went in, I thought that, okay, I'm going to do this and come back out. I never thought that I would have any kind of problems in there. I just figured, hey, I'm going to do my time and come out, you know. I didn't even think I was going to go to Vietnam for some reason, and I get into this was, and I don't think I mentioned this in the book, but one of the things that happened, and this may be in, there's a second part of my book that this may be addressed, but one of the things that happened was is that before I got drafted, I was called down to military CID headquarters in Newark, New Jersey, in the federal building.
Yeah.
And so I went in the federal building and, I went to this room. They had me in an interrogation room. I didn't know what was going on. And prior to them doing that, certain members in my community said, people that came and asked about my character and who I was and what they thought about me. So I never thought much about it. But underneath that, I said, well, maybe I'm going to be a secret agent or something. Maybe they got something special happening for me. So I was like, oh, I'll probably be in Paris in civilian clothes, doing some clandestine work. This is just the fantasy of a 19-year-old kid thinking that, like, hey, why would they investigate me? So once they got me in the office, they sat me down, and the first thing they asked me was my mother a communist? And I said, what? So all my life I heard the word communist and communism, and it was always negative, and it was real scary. And I remember I'm of a generation when you used to hear the sirens for the drills. You would get under your desk, like that was really going to save us. Get under the desk, and that's going to save you from the nuclear war, or whatever, the atomic bomb, or whatever they're going to drop. But anyway, and they always mention communism. So communism was a very bad word. I was scared of that word, and immediately I said, no, my mother's not a communist, which I didn't know. But my mother was an activist when she was a teenager. And what happened was my mother was very active in unions, and she also was very active in local politics. She was the committee woman for our area, and she was, that preceded me getting involved in stuff because there was a role model for me, which I never thought about until after I look back. I drew the lens back. But anyway, I'm in the federal building. They're saying my mother's a communist and everything. And they asked me something about my father. At that time, I really hadn't met my father and I didn't know much about him. But anyway, I told them, oh, my mother's not a communist. Oh my God, this, that, and the other. Come to find out, when my mother was 16 years old, there was a youth group she belonged to. And they met every week in a building that was owned by the Communist Party.
Mhm.
So she had been put on the House Un-American Activities Committee list of
Mhm.
potential people that may have been involved with communism, which I didn't know. Later on, I found out my sister, who was a Black Panther member, was also on that list as well. But suffice to say, that didn't save me. I should have said yes, she was a communist, and I'm a communist, and maybe I wouldn't have went to Vietnam. They would have said, "Hey, rejected." But I didn't have enough sense to do that. So, went to Vietnam. And, when I first got there, it was, I mean, that everything was different. I smelled, smells were different. I think it's one of the first things is everything smells different. And, I just going to do my part. But, my book and the story is, and like, I hope some of the people will get it just to understand. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, is that I began to see you know, the differences and the separation of races and what they were doing to us as African American soldiers, what they did to the white soldiers. And, I was so naive. I was just like, oh, I thought everything was equal. I really believed. I went to Catholic school, so I really believed in the American dream and all these American stuff. And I was trying to, be a good person and all that kind of stuff. The things that, hey, I want to, be out here and do something, whatever. But anyway, the circumstances got so dire. And one thing that I have to say, if people don't understand, is when you're in a war zone and people say they don't like you, then that you better be very cautious because what happens is everybody has a weapon. And just imagine if you was at your workplace and everybody had a weapon and people said, hey, I don't like you, so and so, or I don't like what you do or what you stand for or who you are, then you might be on guard about what they might do. And I had several attempts on my life while I was, in the Army by American GIs, guys that were supposed to be fighting alongside me. So
You're
that
talking
shaped a
about
lot.
an experience with a Confederate flag guy
Yeah.
from Tennessee.
Yeah. Well, one of them experiences, is like you said, was with a Confederate flag. And one of the things that happened was I became very opinionated, and I started challenging authority, something that you can't do in the military. As a result, um, we always wanted to, like a hooch is a barracks. So we always wanted to have a hooch where, all our friends and people that related to us, we could play the kind of music we wanted. We talked the kind of, so I was in that kind of hooch with black soldiers, and we really, related to each other. What they did was when they realized that I was so opinionated and were trying to break me, they moved me to a barracks that we were nothing but Southerners and rednecks in it, which I didn't really know until later on when I looked around. I was the only black guy in this hooch. And one morning I woke up and I was half asleep because somebody woke me up. They were tapping. It was this tap. What the hell was tapping? I looked up and this guy had this huge Confederate flag. I mean, it was a big flag, and I was stunned. I was like, what what so anyway, man, when I came through, I was like, what's going on with this? Yeah, my dad had sent me this flag. Yeah, yeah, but I snatched it down. I snatched and I ripped it because it was tacked in there. And he went, my dad has sent me this. Oh, my Lord, my dad, like, I'm like, man, I thought we was in the American Army. That was how naive I was about where people's heads were at. Well, that didn't go over very well. And there was some incidences. I have to really say they did get me one time. I really got, but there was revenge involved, and I got mine. But that's another story. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff that was happening at that time. We're talking about in the '60s when civil rights movement was just beginning to take shape, and we're sort of learning about ourselves, but we didn't know. We were like, okay, I'm from the North. So I wasn't used to being addressed a certain way or doing certain things that were taking place in other parts of the country. And so we became, as other guys came in, we became more and more educated about what was going on in other parts of the world. You have a
Mhm.
question, Harvey? You have a question, Jim?
You learned a lot also about what was going on back home.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I learned
Yeah,
a lot about what people were doing, how they were organizing,
yeah,
and it was guys were coming in with new information about what was happening in communities, and we came in with a little more pride. We listened to music that was talking about revolution and change and stuff
yeah,
like that. All the music had something to do with it. I remember one uh, Edwin Starr War and
Yep.
different songs like that that were like saying, "Hey, you don't need to be doing this." And in my book, I talk about the time I was in Saigon. I was looking at some books in outdoor mall, and there was a book about Martin Luther King translated in Vietnamese, and I was so surprised because the Americans make you think that the people that you're fighting or you're attacking are ignorant. They don't have any culture, they don't have anything, and you're bringing them culture, you're bringing them stability and all this. And had I known prior to going to Vietnam, I would have studied more of their culture because they had a rich culture, and they had fought back the French, and they were used to struggle. They had struggled before. I didn't know any of that, and I remember looking at the book, and then a young Vietnamese woman who was a student. I'm almost sure she was a student. She said, "Why you fight Vietnam? You know, Canadians counter America."
Right.
And I was like, wow, that made me think a lot of like, you got a good point. You know, Muhammad Ali and had taken a stand, and a lot of people were against Muhammad Ali, but he stood for his convictions. Uh, I didn't know enough about stuff at that time to make that kind of stand because I hadn't really analyzed it, and I thought I just can go. I'm drafted 2 years, I'll be out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
hmm
And my uncles that went, so it was okay.
So Greg,
But
do you think your book, when I read it, I thought, wow, I think I get a better grasp now of what it was like for African Americans to serve in Vietnam. Was your experience, do you consider your experience normal or was it unusual? What happened
well,
to you?
looking back, I think there might have been some things that might have been different because of who I was, and very frankly, being naive and talking about the way I talked about certain things. But I think that overall, I think a lot of the black veterans, GIs, as well, when you go back and you look at World War II and the other conflicts that we've all fought in, there was always a difference. There's always like, hey, and when you have a situation when all I mean, the first time I saw a black lieutenant, I almost fell out of a truck. I was like, oh, wow, God, a black lieutenant? That was a big thing. You didn't see black officers. Most officers you saw white through your whole tour. And you didn't see any that had any kind of field grade like majors or colonels, anything like that. The most you might have seen was a black captain, maybe, but you didn't see anybody of a higher rank. So I think that yeah, there was a certain normal thing that they would do with black soldiers. Generally, but like I think in some cases, because of who I was, there was some other things, extra things done, like taking me out of a white barracks and putting me in a redneck barracks. I don't think that happened on a regular basis, but they were trying to break me into what they did was they would do things, and prior to that, they would do things like I would challenge them on something. They would say like, "Oh, we're going to see a movie tonight, but Private Payton messed up, so you're not going to see a movie." So you know what happens when you're in the military. That was like escape. A couple of hours of movie was a big escape.
Sure.
Now this guy here, how do I feel about him? I don't feel too good that he denied me that opportunity. So people, they really want to turn, they want to have, like say, are you familiar with blanket parties, gentlemen?
Yes.
Blanket party. Okay. Well, for those that are listening, a blanket party is when you go, who they throw a blanket over your head and they beat the shit out of you. Now, I've experienced something similar to that, but that's what the kind of thing they want to do to have the soldiers correct anybody that's out of line. So it was really what it did. It just made me actually go AWOL. Eventually, I had to leave my post because I was afraid that if I stayed, I would be executed. Which
Yeah.
sounds
Yeah.
strange for a lot of people that think, oh, everything is equal. No, but it's not.
Yeah.
And when you don't have with the so-called administration or the officers corps that doesn't stand there and protect you or want to do that, and they sort of instigate stuff, then you don't have nothing but no choice but to spend for yourself, which I did. I found I was a survivor. I'm a survivor, so
Mhm.
like I come from a situation. I'm gonna make it no matter what, and that's what I did. I made choices that would keep me out of harm's way as best I could.
Did did when they were doing this, as far as, well, you're not going to see a movie because of Greg Payton. Um, did did your fellow African American soldiers support you, rally, or did they, or was it successful what the military was doing
No, they
in trying
didn't.
to set you?
A lot of guys, you have to remember, man, the military is they do something to you mentally. So there's a lot of guys that were mad at me,
Hmm.
that look like me. And getting back to the incident with the me pulling down the flag, I had a platoon sergeant come in, a black platoon sergeant, and told me it was no big thing, the Confederate flag. And I said, "Well, what flag do you serve?" I mean, I thought this is American. But he tried to tell us it's just their way. It's no big thing. You shouldn't be upset by it. I'm like, what? You know, because what happens is that like, yeah, people have been denying themselves or trying to look the other way or whatever it is in their mind, and they have given in to this is just the way it is.
Yeah.
But I hadn't come from that. I wasn't wise enough to know. I didn't think that this is the way it was. But like I say, some of it was being very naive and not really going and understanding like how to position that. It was just out of sheer, hey man, this ain't right. What you doing? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
You
Uh,
talked about noticing when new people came on that the new white people ended up driving Jeeps or working in the offices,
Right.
and the blacks were doing the scut work and digging sand and everything else. So it
That was
was
the first.
obvious. Yeah.
That was the first thing that made me begin to question. I didn't question. Listen, during the Tet Offensive, I showed up and did what I was supposed to do. Of course, that was it, all hands on deck, and I did that. You know what I mean? But even after that situation, when it came down to the details and stuff like that, white soldiers would come in and they weren't going on these details. They weren't doing the latrine thing. They wasn't doing all that stuff. And I had more seniority than them, and they were getting in, office jobs, all that kind of stuff. And so I asked the sergeant about it, like, hey man, what's up with that? You told us, hey, we'll move up as other people came in. We move up, but we haven't moved. And I was marked. That was the thing. That's one of the reasons I got marked as a troublemaker
Yeah.
because I started questioning stuff. And when you're in the military, you just follow orders. You don't disobey orders. You follow them. You don't talk back. You don't do nothing. If I
exactly.
give you an order, you just take it.
So this is a good lesson for anybody who's thinking about joining the military.
Yeah.
Remember, if you actually stand up for your own rights, you got a problem.
You got a price to pay. Yeah.
Yeah, there will be a price to pay. Just like currently there's a group of former veterans that are in legislative positions and intelligent officers that have put out a video. I don't know if you've seen it yet, Harvey
You bet.
or Jim, but they're telling the soldiers that you don't have to obey unlawful order. That
Yeah.
if the order is unlawful, you do not have to obey it. And
Yeah.
a lot of soldiers don't know that. They think they have to follow, you know. And see, there goes the circumstances, when they had the Nuremberg trials and they had the Nazi soldiers, SS troops. They were saying they were just following orders. Yeah, well, this was the order you shouldn't have followed, you know, because this is, you did some things against humanity. And as American soldiers, that's what we have done. Sometimes we followed orders that were not in line with where we should have been, a humane thing, and we could have maybe stood up to them if in fact we knew about it, and even if we did, we probably would have been chastised for it to some degree, because
Yeah.
they don't want anybody standing up to them.
No, no.
Yeah.
I think in the book you say you've been diagnosed with PTSD. Now, did that PTSD come from being in Vietnam and serving against the Vietnamese people, or did the PTSD come from what you dealt with regard to your own military?
No, I think what happens is, first of all, I didn't know nothing about PTSD until a long time after. Actually, I didn't know anything about PTSD, until I got clean, to tell you the truth, because nobody was talking about it, and I didn't know that people were suffering the way I was suffering in terms of, the things I did to self-medicate myself so that I would be all right. I think it was a combination of both things. I think that uh, some of it came from the treatment, but a lot of it came from the pressure of being there, understanding that and wanting to get home, understanding. And when you wake up one day and you find yourself in a circumstance, you say, I have no business being here. I need to be home. This ain't right. What's going on is not right. It's sort of like, it makes you think a certain way, it makes you feel a certain kind of way. I was duped. If I'd have known what this was about from the beginning, and I always tell people this. Listen, if I knew about conscientious rejection, I may have had a choice to go to Canada.
Mm.
I went to McGill University up in Canada, got my master's degree, and came on back after the war. Jimmy Carter would have pardoned me, and I've been working on Wall Street or Madison Avenue.
Yeah. Well,
I
instead
might
of
be living
doing,
in the penthouse on Fifth. See, it's a fantasy. I
yeah.
could have been living on a penthouse on Fifth Avenue somewhere
Uh-huh.
in New York City.
Or, even even the National Guard was not actually an option for most
Right. I
black
didn't
folks.
really think about the National Guard at the time, although when we went in, we were basic training. You had NG, National Guard,
Hmm.
Mhm.
and we were, US was the draftee, and RG was regular Army, RA.
Yeah. Well, in your book, you talks about some amazing statistics. In 1967, only 1.1% of the National Guard, Army National Guard were black.
Mm.
1%.
Right. But we didn't, again, that wasn't, in other communities, certain people did certain things to protect their kids, and guys jumped into the National Guard, when they knew the war was coming over, and, it stayed out of it. Now, what happened in ensuing time, especially in this time now, the National Guard don't really save you because they put you in active duty.
Yeah.
And I'm telling people that because I was a young man, and it took me really approximately 15 years to sort of get my head on straight, that guys going from Iraq and going to Afghanistan and all these different places are in a worse situation than some Vietnam vets, because their trauma has come at a later age in their life,
Right.
and it's always hard to release trauma when you're in the older you are, the harder it is to get rid of trauma.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I feel for a lot of them folks that joined the National Guard thinking they wouldn't be called up, and then they got called up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially
You
with
know,
families and stuff. And the guys come back home. Your wife has been holding it down for a year. As soon as you come home, she can't wait to give you the reins, and you're not ready to take the reins. So there's a,
Yeah.
if we looked at statistical thing, I bet you if they had them, they may. There's a lot of marriages and stuff that ended when these guys came back home. They were in a different place than where their where their wives were or husbands were when they left.
Yeah.
So it's
Well,
different.
how did you deal with the stuff after you got out? I know your book
Um,
talks about what you went through, the horror you went through coming out.
when I came out, I tried to suppress everything. I was home for 1 week from Vietnam, and I went back to my old job. I was a dairy manager in a supermarket when I left, and I went back to my job. After a week, I didn't take off. I went off a week, which was way too soon. I hadn't really, but I'm thinking, hey, I want to get back into the regular. I want to forget about this. And like I said, when I went back in my book, I talk about the manager who kept saying to me, how many gooks did you kill? How many gooks did you kill? And say somewhere along the line, and I've said this often, I didn't understand that gook was a racial slur. I really didn't realize that. And then one point it came to me, oh, the gook is the same thing as me calling somebody a nigger. It's the same thing. It's a racial slur. So that bothered me from the beginning. And then he kept asking me, and I was like, and one morning I addressed it. I threatened him, and I lost my job quite naturally. But uh, it was like I'm glad I didn't hurt him because at that time I could have hurt him. I really could have hurt him because I wasn't stable enough to understand that I was suffering from this what they call post-traumatic stress disorder. I didn't understand that, and I started like self-medicating, and because like what happened was and when it wasn't until I got clean from drugs that I realized I had never used a drug till I went to Vietnam. And the first night, but see, me being so slick, I'm trying to be, what do you call it, down with the crowd. Like I know what's going on. I go to Vietnam. I had heard they had marijuana over there, so I was like, "Yeah, I heard y'all got some marijuana and all this stuff." And the first night, me and a guy named Lester, this is my partner. I wish I could find. I don't know what happened to Lester. We did everything, basic training. We did everything together. Went to Vietnam together. Went to jail together. But anyway, Lester and I went out, with some guys. They want to hear from what's going on in the world. That's what they say. Some new people come. They want to hear what's going on in the world. So we went to a place called what they call behind our camp called Smoky Mountain. So we went behind there, and they started giving us cigarettes. I thought they were cigarettes. There were marijuana in cigarettes. And I said, oh, this is a cigarette. And I smoked it real quick like a cigarette. And then all of a sudden, this thing hit me. And I was, wow, what? Oh my God. I had never had that experience because I had never really smoked any marijuana. And, this really was like, oh my God. That night I saw colors. I was levitating. It was something. And I really liked it. Lester hated it. So Lester stopped, I was like, yeah, I like this. And so I continued it. But Lester started drinking. And in Vietnam, you can get a quart of vodka for $1, right? Lester with 2 quarts of vodka, and they had this blueberry not a blueberry brand, but it was orange juice in little 6-ounce cans. He would get 2 quarts of vodka and 2 little bottles of orange juice, 2 little cans of orange juice. And then like maybe within a half an hour, 45 minutes, he started yelling, who drank my orange juice? Who drank? Well, you had 2 quarts of vodka, Lester. I mean, the orange juice didn't last that long, but that was happening. So he did that. And, but that's what you had to do. You had to drink or you took drugs.
Yeah.
And, and like I said, as I stayed in AWOL in the village, I began to find out that there were opium dens, and I went to the opium dens and started smoking opium. And so that opium opened up my opium center in my brain, which I didn't understand at the time. So when I came home, I was predisposed to using heroin and stuff like that. So coming home was no big thing. I found out I left, and this is something that really amazed me. When I left the projects in Jersey City, 1967, I got drafted June 22nd. You could not find a marijuana cigarette in the project. In the projects, nobody smoked marijuana. I mean, you heard about it, and some people might have had. I think one time somebody found a roach or something. It was about 10 of us trying to smoke a roach or something like that. A roach is a very small, the end of a marijuana cigarette. Anyway, when I came back from Vietnam, not only was there marijuana everywhere, the whole project was flooded with heroin, and my two best friends were shooting heroin. And I say, if I didn't go to Vietnam, I would be shooting heroin. I know that because my two best friends were shooting heroin,
Mm.
you know. And when I found that out, I was like, oh, okay. So they were going to New York to get it. And I went with them a few times. And when we went up to New York, then I saw a lot of veterans that I knew from Vietnam that were from New York. They were up in Harlem. And that was then just, I mean, then it was like, oh, I'm going up there every day. I'm doing this and that. That was the beginning of another era of
Mm.
being out on the street and doing different things to supply a habit, a drug habit.
Mhm. Well, how did you get clean?
Um, it's funny. It's not funny, but, I wasn't never raised. Addiction make you do some things that you never thought you would do. And I was never raised um, in a circumstance where I was doing the things I did. I remember I never thought I could get addicted. First thing I thought, oh, I'll never get addicted because I'm too smart for that. Well, they're the ones that get it to first, the ones that think they're so smart, like me. So what happened was, after a few years of doing this, more than a few years, I had a day where, it was like, I guess what you call the bottom day. And at the end of the day, it was either you know, I get clean or I kill myself. It was no gray area.
Hmm.
I had tried unsuccessfully to go to rehabs. I never really wanted to stop. I loved addiction. I loved drugs. I never wanted to stop. So when I went to rehab, prior to the last time I went, I always went with like, okay, I'm gonna save my job or I'm gonna appease my family or something like that. So I never really took it serious. And it's funny how, looking back, how counselors and people knew I wasn't serious, I don't know, I thought I was saying the right thing, but they all knew I was full of shit. Anyway, like I said, one evening I was like, either I'm going to do this. I had a bad day running around doing different things, trying to get more money, what we say, trying to get more. And I sort of reached to a point where I was like, I can't do this. So I made a decision that I was going to try to like either I'm gonna take myself out. Fuck it, I ain't I'm not doing anything. And I heard and this is the story that I heard it clear as the day a voice say, "Why don't you try living?" And I don't know if that was in my subconscious or whatever, but it was very clear. Why don't you try living? And so from that, it made me call. I told you the two guys I was shooting dope with. One had died of AIDS, and the other one had got clean. And I couldn't get in touch with him. He's my best friend, but I had his number. And I called his house, and I had been calling his house, and he was never home. But eventually I called his house, and he answered. So he told me where I told him I was at, and he drove down and picked me up. And he told me that as a veteran, I can go back to the VA. I had tried the VA one time, but I didn't know I could go back. And so I said, yeah. And I went back to my house, which I had a restraining order and everything. I asked one of my sons to let me in so I could take a shower. He did. And I went the next day to the VA. What happened at this time when I went into the VA, and what funny thing happened on my way to the VA. Well, I got to the VA and I was ready to surrender. And they told me to come back tomorrow. I was like, what? To come back tomorrow? I didn't have nowhere else to go. I was homeless in the street. I'd been living in the street. I didn't have no come back tomorrow. I didn't have nowhere to go. So I was very despondent, So there were some windows there. But the bottom line is that they sent me upstairs since the VA, since that was, the ward where they treat you wasn't taking people. They sent me upstairs and they put me on the psych ward. And they gave me some drugs called Haldol and Thorazine.
Mm.
If you know anything about psycho, stuff, Haldol and Thorazine are pharmaceutical straitjackets.
Mm.
And they had me in the pharmaceutical straitjacket for a couple of weeks. And then finally they told me they had an opening and I went down to the ward 18A in the East Orange VA. And the difference was when they asked me questions how I feel like getting high. I started telling the truth about my feelings, which is something I never did before. And, they would, oh, this, that, and the other. And finally, one day they asked me how I'm doing. I said, "Hey, I feel, okay, something. I didn't say I wanted to get high. And the first time I realized that I went a whole day and didn't think about using drugs. And later on, we talk about the when the addiction lifted from you. A lot of people know the clean date, but we don't know the date that the addiction lifted from us, where we stopped thinking about drugs, where, and it's different for everybody, and I found out, having worked in addiction treatment centers and stuff, that's one of the things that nobody knows. When that addiction is lifted from you, we don't think about it on a regular 24-hour basis. So I went to the VA, and then other veterans came in that would talk about the experiences and help us. And I wanted what they had. I looked at how they looked and everything. And, I talk about my book about Clarence Fitch, who was, a recovering addict. And he's also a political operative in terms of he was with VVAW, Vietnam Veterans Against the War. And he began to give me political education. I began to learn about what was going on. I went to meetings and met other veterans, uh, you know, and I began to see that war was not the answer and that we were used as pawns. And that as veterans, they don't even, when we come back home, they want to discard us. They don't want to give us the things that we need to survive and get better. And that's the thing about this country is that they want our troops, our troops. Yeah, when your troops come home, you don't care nothing about the troops. You just throw them. You know what I mean? People listen right now, and I bet you American public doesn't know. There are Army soldiers that are on food stamps. There's soldiers that are on food stamps.
Mm-hmm.
And they're thinking about, no, they don't make enough money in the military that they have to supplement their pay with food stamps. That's hard. Why our soldiers, the ones that's supposed to protect us, are on food stamps? Come on. That
And,
is a terrible thing.
and
So
Republicans want to cut that program.
yeah, they want to cut anything that would help somebody get better. They don't want health care for nobody, and the constant thing to get more money and more money and more money. I mean, it's how much money do you need? How much can you get? I mean, I look at what the current president is doing. It's like, well, how much is enough? You know, you can't. My friend always said, I never saw a U-Haul behind a hearse. And the reality of it is that you can't take it with you. And so no matter what you're doing, and then my experiences in life has told me that people that are very wealthy don't really have a good life. Being wealthy does not make you happy. And certainly it would be easier if I had a bunch of money. But there's other situations that happen. One of the things is your health. No matter how much money you have, if you have bad health, hey, I remember the first time I realized that Happy Rockefeller had a double mastectomy. And I was like, wow. And I'm sure if they had all the money the Rockefellers had, they couldn't stop that cancer. And see, that's what we're talking about. I was just saying to people that what irritates me more about this country is how they do things. For instance, this is the holiday time. You got Salvation Army. You got every group asking people to donate money. You see the St. Jude donate money. Everybody donate money so that we can. Listen, when they want to build a new aircraft carrier, they don't ask nobody to donate no money. They just want to build an aircraft carrier, which is like, say, how many charities could an aircraft carrier support? How many services could a fighter jet support? but yet we have to support the help cancer research. We have to support to take money out of our pocket to support that, but the government won't kick in to support it where they know they can do better and provide more money. But there's too much money trying to defend rich folks so that they can have yachts and do all this other crazy stuff, and they want to take every opportunity for a poor person just to survive. So that's
Yeah.
why we're out here doing what we need to do and talking the talk that we need to talk, because this is not the way the America should be. It shouldn't be like that. We know there's models in other countries that have sustained themselves with free health care. They've done things different. They have made their defense smaller and their social programs larger, and they've done different things. We could do that. We have plenty of resources in this country to do it. You had a
Yeah.
question, Harvey
I
or
was
Jim?
just going to uh, see if you could tell us, give us a big picture or maybe some of the high points of your international peace work.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, um,
Because you've been all over and you've met the kings of peace
I
work.
met a lot. I bet I met a lot of important. I think one of the things that happens in peace work, and it happens with everybody now, even right now, when we talk about the division in this country, you got to talk to everybody. You can't just talk to um, people that agree with you. You need to talk to some people that don't agree with you, so you can understand what their points are and where they're coming from.
Mhm.
You know, the first time I went internationally was to Vietnam, and I went back to Vietnam with a group of soldiers. And we met with Vietnamese soldiers. We sat down at the table together. At some point, we broke bread together. But one of the things we recognized that we both were pawns of our governments. That we didn't ask to be doing what we did. We were either drafted or put in a position where we had no choice. And we found out that, I'll give you an example. Meeting with Vietnamese veterans, we came in there, Americans, and we want to know about the MIA situation. You see the black feds, POW MIAs, right? I would love to know who gets that money when people donate to them organizations, because my experience back then has been no POWs and there are no MIAs that are being held captive. These people are trying, at the time they're trying to rebuild and they're trying to feed their families. They ain't trying to, keep anybody else captive. But anyway, we asked the question, yeah, what about the MIAs? There was silence. And then one of the soldiers said, yeah, well, we have over 1 million MIAs. So what? We have over 1 million MIAs, Vietnamese soldiers, 1 million MIAs. So that shows you the scope of what happens. We dropped more bombs on Vietnam than we did in World War II. When you fly into Hanoi, I had a lump in my throat because I didn't know what to expect from the Vietnamese people. Because I'm saying I flew and I saw bomb craters, when we landed. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know. And they welcomed us with open arms. They shared with us. And what I learned was this: the Vietnamese people had put the war behind them and was moving on, trying to improve their life. The Americans are still stuck in Vietnam. They still can getting over the fact that these Vietnamese people, with their so-called primitive ways or whatever it was, actually ran us out of Vietnam. And there's still people fighting the Vietnamese War, the Vietnamese War. So that was the first thing. So we met with a lot of people that at the time of the circumstances were our enemies, and we found out that they suffered from the same thing. And one situation, we sat down with some soldiers, and we found out that one of the guys with us, Dave Klein in particular, David Klein, who is, for those that don't know, used to be the president of Veterans for Peace, but he was on this trip with me. David Klein was another person that had so much political knowledge that educated me across the board in so many different things, because like I said, I was very naive. Um, he got very, very nervous on the way to this place. He remembered Payton there. He thought there may be an ambush or something. I had to sort of talk him down a little bit. But when we got there and started talking to the commandant, and they started talking about circumstances, come to find out they were both in the same battle in different parts.
Yeah.
One was on top of the mountain, one was fighting to get up the mountain. And that was the Black Virgin Mountain. And so that was very interesting. So I came back from Vietnam and it was like, okay. So then I had met some soldiers, some conscientious objectors from South Africa. And they came to the United States to talk about apartheid and what they were doing, and we supported them because they refused to go into the South African Defense Force, which meant some of them were being incarcerated or whatever because they refused to go fight in the townships and in Namibia at the time. And a group of them wanted me to come, or wanted a veteran in particular to come and to talk about what war was really like and to explain it to students and people that wanted to hear about our side of the story. So I went into apartheid South Africa, which was like, um, wow, it was very intense. Um, Before I went, I asked permission from the African National Congress and the Pan African Congress. I met them in New York. And they wanted to know about it, and they said, "Oh, you should go because we need people to come back and talk about what's really going on, what's happening." And so I went in, and ANC and the PAC were banned, so you couldn't talk about them. But there were people, and see, I was ignorant. And I asked somebody about the ANC, they looked at me, and they looked at me sternly, and you could tell by the tone, the ANC is banned. We don't talk about the ANC, and that's it. You come in with this American way, you have freedom. You can talk about what you want to talk about and do. Well, in some places, that's not the truth, that you can't. And if you do, you might be incarcerated, or better yet, you might be taken out. And so I went all over South Africa. I spoke at Stellenbosch, which was PW Botha's alma mater. I was in Crossroads KTC in Cape Town, which is I went to Chesterville Township in Durban. I went to Natal. I went to Grahamstown. I spoke at the University of Grahamstown. I spoke all over South Africa. Decent crowds came, basically talking about my experience and why I changed and what was important to me today and stuff like that. Um, One of the things about South Africa and one of the things that happened for me was South Africa is so over policed that I sort of slipped through the cracks. Like there's so many different kinds of police in South Africa that I wasn't picked up by, they didn't have information and the computer systems and what they have today. So I was able to slide by and move from different places. And when I was traveling on a plane, they had booked all the flights, and my name was ML King. That's how they booked them because they knew there was a black soldier, Vietnamese, soldier coming from Vietnam, but they didn't know who. So they made me ML King on these flights, So I went all
Wow.
over, and it was fascinating talking to, the courage of these people, knowing that they may be arrested or killed at any time, then had no way to fight this, And everybody had a history. Apartheid had touched every person and taken lives in everybody's family. It was like Cambodian Pol Pot when he killed all of the people in Cambodia. There was not a person in Cambodia who wasn't touched by the atrocity of Pol Pot. So going back to apartheid, there was no African family that wasn't touched by apartheid, that some member didn't get killed or whatever it was. The students began to rebel, and they were the ones that picked up the mantle and began to organize and stuff. And I remember meeting a guy named Sandili Tusi, who was a student leader. And I went by his house. When I went to South Africa, I was met by a British guy named Howard Clark. We became very, very close. But at the time, I was very like, why would they have me with a white guy in South Africa? Well, Howard Clark knew every freedom fighter, every movement, he knew so much about the historical thing in South Africa that, again, it was an education in itself, and I'm so grateful to have him. And, so, uh, It was just like that set me off. But talking to people like Sanduli Tusi, when he talked about his the struggles, he was now under house arrest, which meant he had to go to the police station every day. He couldn't leave his house. Um, the retribution they did, they bombed his house,
Mm.
and the only thing that saved him, they bombed where he slept, his bedroom, and he wasn't in the bedroom. That's the only thing that saved his life. But we went to the house, and you could see his
Mm.
bedroom was bombed. Nothing there. As a
Mm.
matter of fact, we sat in what was his bedroom and discussed, talked to stuff. And he
Mm.
was, led the student movement. You
Mm.
know, when I was in Alexander Township, and I was telling people, I said, you go in there. I went into Alexander Township, and you have to remember, I didn't read about a lot of this stuff. I didn't know, I had sort of tried to keep an open mind because I wanted to bring back impressions rather than be led to somewhere. So you go in Alexander Township, and what you do is you go in, and the first thing I noticed was this behemoth a structure, concrete structure. It was like I thought also, well, damn, that must be the police station. Did you have any idea what it was, Harvey?
I have no idea.
A
This big
prison?
concrete bunker liquor
Wow.
store.
A liquor store.
It was a liquor store. The students had burnt down every time they tried to build a liquor store. The students knew that their parents were drinking and was on that stuff. And they had all these what they call shebins, which were like juke joints, these independent places they would go to drink. So what they did was they said the best thing they can do is eliminate the drugs, the liquor, and maybe some of their parents would come around. So every time they built the liquor store, they burnt it down until where they had to make it a concrete bunker, you know? So that was amazing too. You don't hear that story,
No.
but talking to every individuals and talking to people living in shanties and different things, the shanties were so immaculate that people kept everything clean and straight. It was just unbelievable how they lived and whatnot, and the sacrifice they made to bring about change and putting their life on the line. And I went back and I saw where they threw Steve Biko out of the window and killed him. And Steve Biko was a student leader, a leader against one of the apartheid leaders. During the time I got there, they killed a lawyer named Daniel Webster, and he had been very much in helping people that were detained. He provided defense for them, mostly African American people and stuff like that. So, yeah, South Africa was I could talk hours about that, different things that happened. You know, um, I talk about this travel in Europe and going into Belfast, Northern Ireland, which was I was in Dublin and went to Belfast. It's funny when you go into Belfast. I don't know if you ever been. But the way it is, you don't get into Belfast unless they let you into Belfast. You have to know, then you're just not walking into Belfast without being challenged. And we went to Belfast one morning, and there was taxi cabs waiting for us when we got out of the train station. We got in these cabs. We went into a place where there was like a converted church that was now a coffee house. And we started sitting down talking to people, and these people were in the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. We went to their headquarters, and they started talking about a different way of life they wanted to do. They wanted to begin to get out of the fighting part of it. They wanted their children to have a better life. They wanted to know about conflict resolution, how things could change. One in four male adults had done time in prison in Northern Ireland. They wanted to break that chain. So that's it. And so when you talk to people that are on the other side of conflicts, it's not always they want to continue to fight. They wanted peace too. But it's the people that are controlling that, the bureaucracies involved with that are mainly it has to do with money and power that continually put people at harm on the ground floor. I mean, the people that don't have any, say so, they're the ones they put in harm's way. We know now, and we could tell you, and you could look at Iraq. You don't know a congressman, a senator, their children haven't went to Iraq or Afghanistan. I remember I challenged the guy on that. He's talking about, oh yeah, well our troops. I said, would you send your daughters? Oh no, there's a volunteer army now. Yeah, no, but would you say if there wasn't a volunteer army, would you send your daughters? Silence, because he know you when nobody's going to send their children off to war knowing that you know what can happen to them. You know what I mean? And that's the hypocrisy of these guys talking about our troops and what we're going to do, and we're sending troops, and you know we're doing this and that. We put aircraft carriers off the coast of Venezuela and all. Listen, you know, we don't know anything about currently. We don't know what's going on in these because we haven't been, abreast of it. They're telling us, they're just telling us stuff, and we know they lie. They've been lying all this time about a lot of stuff. That's what's so scary about the Epstein files. There's some lies that are going to come to light that a lot of people don't want to see. So, I even went into, I was in Libya and I met Gaddafi. You know. I don't talk much about it, but I was in Libya and I met Gaddafi, and I had a different understanding of what Libyans went through and how they were trying to fight for their liberation and have their own, say, control over their own resources. You know, it's just like, say, Zelensky in what's they're fighting now in
Ukraine.
Ukraine. Yeah, it's just like Zelensky in Ukraine. He had to make a deal where he had to give up his natural resources in order for them to get more weapons. Now he has to begin to make a deal that he has to give up land and stuff in order to get some kind of peace. You know what I mean? And the people don't want to do it. They don't, but like the bottom line is that um, they're being forced in a situation which is is just very painful to see in this time of what goes on, that we're still killing each other thinking that we're going to have peace. There'll never be peace. You can't kill my whole family and think I'm going to be friends with you. That's never going to happen, And we've been doing this model over and over again, and the model has never worked. It's never worked. And so what happens is when you do that, and this is what I learned in South Africa, there were like white people that had apartheid and all that stuff, but guess what? They lived in fear. In their houses in the white suburbs, they had attack dogs, they had barbed wire fences, they had all kinds of security systems because they knew maybe at some point these people would be understand that there's more of them than there were of them. 27 million blacks and 5 million whites. Oh, I don't think that number's a fair number. But that's what happens, people. So when you go to war and you kill people, now you need more weapons to protect yourself because there might be a rebuttal. There's going to be somebody that's going to come for you. But there'll never be enough, and you'll never stop people from hating you because you can't kill my whole family and think we'll be friends. You have a
Well,
question?
I think that's a great message to put out there, and I think more people realize that. I know, we try to really rely on that for Veterans for Peace, that, war is not going to solve problems.
No.
And we had a guest on who said, there's only one kind of security: common security, mutual security. If you think you're secure and your neighbor or your occupied territories are have no rights, you'll never be secure until they're secure.
There's a lot. There's a lot of people that don't want to look at the other side of the coin. They want to make boogeyman. We always have to have a boogeyman.
Yeah,
See, when I was coming up, communism and the Russians were boogeymen.
yeah,
They weren't, I mean, during World War II, they were allies. Now, all of a sudden, they're boogeymen because they have a different way of life. And there's no better way of life than what happens here in America. We can't have anything but capitalism. That's the only way we can live and survive. There's no other better way.
yeah,
We
yeah.
can't do anything or help anybody or share anything with anybody. I mean, healthcare is crazy. When you go, if you don't have any healthcare now, it's not going to get better. We look at, look at all the different things. Education.
Yeah.
Kids can't go to school now. I mean, it's just everything is so expensive, and just trying to get the basic, matter of fact, I just heard somebody, I was listening to TV, and somebody was reciting the preamble to the Constitution. And I was like, oh, we're not living that way. That preamble must not apply to many of us,
Mm-mm.
you know. And that's what I think people don't understand is that there was a foundation set for all of us to live in a certain kind of way. There's some people that just ignore that foundation and they're going to make it the way they want to be, you know.
And they just happen to be in charge.
And they are in charge right now,
Yeah.
and they hold the purse strings and they do everything else, and they're trying to erase history. I
Yeah.
think they're a little bit too late. Understand that Trump sent headset to the Netherlands to take down two plaques about African Americans that who fought valiantly in World War II, and they had plaques that commemorated them in the Netherlands, and they want to take them plaques down because they don't want no, we don't want no history of African Americans doing
Right.
anything that was positive for this country. They don't want to like, hey, and okay, and everybody's, like I hear the brothers talking, and I heard this guy from Barstool Sports talk about, yeah, but we don't have anything, we ain't had nothing to do with slavery. So we don't want to hear nothing about slavery. Yeah, well, you've all stood on the shoulders of slavery. You all profited by it. The companies, the organizations, the things you do, how your very lifestyle may have depended on free labor that built the economic engine that created your wealth or created an opportunity for you to have business. So now you want to disregard all that, and everybody's supposed to forget about that pain. But in other circumstances, we cannot forget about the Holocaust. You know, what about the Middle Passage? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
People, like, hey, we have to consider all these things were horrific, but we can't pick and choose which ones we want to say were more. There was no more or less. They all were horrific, and we have to understand that so we don't repeat.
Yeah.
Understanding history is not to do the same mistakes expecting different results. War is doing the same mistakes expecting different results. We're never gonna solve it with war. That's
No.
not it. It's never going to be solved. And that's why I come into continuum, until some people realize that that's not the answer. You know what I mean? And see, and also the other thing is we keep using young people to fight our battles. And, you have all these older folks sending young people to their death based on some bullshit. Because no matter what it is, it's not that important to have their lives taken over what? You know, when I came back, I said, "Well, what was even? We're supposed to bring all this, save the Vietnamese from communism and uh, we didn't do any of that. You
Mm-mm.
know, we did. I mean, we did so much damage that thank God that they're beginning to repair it. And it's taken years and years and years for them even to get back to some semblance of normalcy and stuff. You know, when I was in Vietnam, I went to a gynecological hospital where they had the feces of women that carried full term babies. Some of them had two or three arms. Some were just a pile of mush. It was horrible. They had jars and jars of all these feces that were just born, with eyes in their forehead and all kinds of crazy stuff because of Agent Orange. We
Mm.
use these chemical stuff, and we know about what is it, the effects of war with the radiation and stuff that guys are experiencing in some of these things. So there's so many things, that we've created, that we've done. And, poison the water, all the different things that we've done to other countries and stuff. And it still ain't got no better. We're still not safe,
Right.
and that's what it is. This stuff will not make you safe. It makes it worse. It makes people begin, it makes a person, there's little kids that I saw in Palestine that are burying their friends. They were out there playing, they wasn't bothering anybody, and their friends got killed. And they got to carry their friends. What do you think that's going to make them feel as they get older? That's trauma they'll never get rid of in their lives. And we create this trauma with these kids. So we got a lot of work to do. We have to talk to people. Thank you guys for what you do, but we got to talk to people and continue to address these circumstances because a lot of times we want to forget, we want to turn on TV and escape, we want to do all these things and forget about what's really happening on the planet. And if we have grandchildren and children, we have to begin to think about them. What kind of life will they have? You
Yeah.
know,
Exactly.
what kind of help will they have?
I understand you got a second book coming out.
Yeah. Well, the second book deals with is actually a prequel because I talk about my early development and things that happened to me that have shaped who I am and what it is. A lot of it dealt with where I was raised at and understanding things and beginning to. I went to Catholic school, which was horrific for me, but I learned a lot of things. But the racism, early racism, and things like that. And I still didn't get shaken. I still believe in my fellow man. I still believe in people. And when I talk to people one on one, there's always something positive that gets out of it, no matter what we think, no matter if you're on the other side of the coin, if you're a MAGA person or whatever it is, that doesn't mean nothing to me. When we talk, we can talk long enough to have some kind of common ground and make something saying, hey, we need to work together on some things together. Now, we may never agree on some other things, but there's some things we could probably agree on if we sit down and talk to each other. I think right now, people want to condemn a whole group of people, and it's on both sides. We
Yeah.
have to stop saying that all these other folks are bad because they don't think like us, and they have to stop saying the same thing about us. You know, and
Hmm.
we got to start sitting down and saying, hey, where can we meet at and what can we do to help each other and where can we begin to build? Because we're all losing out.
Yeah.
We're not working at our best.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. When I read my book, it takes me back to these times. And sometimes it's not always a good feeling. It takes a while to sort of like say, whoa, but also lets me know I'm so blessed in being able to have my right mind to be able to talk about these things because so many guys like me didn't have the ability to do it. They are not able to articulate what happened, you
Yeah.
know? And as a result, they've lost their families, they've lost themselves. Every time I see somebody homeless or somebody that is mentally ill living in the street, it's just but for the grace of God that that's not me. Because I know nobody started out saying I want to live in the doorway and push a shopping cart full of shopping bags and ask people for help on the street. That was another thing that happened to our country that we didn't stand by. One of our presidents, Ronald Reagan, cut back the funding for mental health
Mhm.
and cut out a lot of institutions trying to, you know, and put people on the street that shouldn't have been on the street.
Exactly.
And as a result, we're inundated now with mental. There's not a lot of mental illness. For instance, let's talk about addiction. They talk about, oh, we want to stop the drugs, and yeah, well, the best way to stop the drugs is stop people from wanting to use drugs. But you're not talking about putting up clinics, putting up rehab centers. You're talking about bombing Colombia, bombing Venezuela, or stopping all that, stopping the traffic. You're not talking about trying to stop people from using by creating more places where if people want to stop using, they can go someplace now and find a rehab or something like that. Rehab is expensive. A lot of rehabs don't want to take you unless you have some kind of health insurance. So
Right.
where's the free rehabs? The few ones few places that have like what they call indigenous beds. They might have at a rehab out of 50 slots, they might have 5 indigenous beds for a whole country, for a whole state.
Mhm.
So how come we're not talking about that? How come the public is not talking about? Let's stop playing games and let's start talking about getting our citizens and our children off of these drugs. Because the reason that they're selling drugs is because we're using them. They're not sending drugs here because, oh, no, they're not sending drugs to try to get us addicted. They're sending drugs because we are addicted. And they know
Right.
they can make money. And they've been making money. And the money they make, and see, this is another thing that people don't look at. The money that's being made are by capitalists. It's not by the individual dealer on the corner. It's not by a local person. It's by these billionaires, these rich people. They're the only
Yeah.
ones that have ships and boats and planes that can afford to put these stuffs together. They might be unnamed, but we know that if we trace some of that money, if you follow the money, you'll find out there are a lot of prominent people that do that because they can't help themselves. If you go to a venture capitalist and you say, hey, give me $100,000 and in 3 months I'll give you back $1 million, it's hard for him to say what, so they don't want, we don't want to be honest about that. Auckland, we don't be honest about who is really doing this. We think that if we lock up all these little kids on the corner, if we take these
Mm.
drug dealers, or yeah, but you ain't locking up no banks. How's the money being cleaned? Who's doing the laundering of the money? Where's the money going? Who's doing that? Nothing but institution. I don't remember this, Harvey, but a while back, when I first got clean, uh, I was in New York, and there was a guy they caught in the Wall Street area. He actually was out in front of Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner, and Smith, the
Mhm.
brokerage house, and he was standing there. He had a duffel bag, and the cops went around the block. They saw him, they ain't paying no attention. They went around the block, and he was still standing there. So they thought it was kind of suspicious because he didn't look like the Wall Street type. So they yanked him over. Hey, they questioned him, and come to find out, there was a duffel bag full of money,
Mm.
drug money that he was trying to get to the Merrill Lynch offices because they're the only ones that can launder $1 million. You can't go to a bank with $1 million and say, "Hey, I want to." They're going to know something. You can't. We know with the. So how's this money? If people are making all this money, how does this money get laundered, and where does it go, and who benefits at the end? And they're not talking about it. They want us to look over here at some little kids or some. So yeah, these black gangs and all. No, they're just the symptom of the disease. They're not the actually core of it. They know where the core is these individuals that are not go nameless, that are responsible for this stuff. And we got to start waking up and understanding that that's not the little boy on the street that's trying to feed his family and thinking, well, hey, I know I can't get no job, so I have to do this to feed my family. And I'm not exalting him of guilt and whatever it is, but I know that there's more folks that are benefiting from this, and it's not him. They're not the ones.
Not the ones. And
So
Oh,
listen, man, I appreciate you guys, and you got me wound up, and I'm glad. I hope I brought some light to some things, and I hope that more individuals read my book and understand. And as soon as my part 2 comes out, I'm going to let you guys know, so you'll be some of the first to know. Appreciate
excellent.
you guys.